So just let me know when we're live.
Like 10 seconds. Well, maybe more. Yeah.
Okay.
Fuck.
Okay, while we're waiting for it to go live, we can just make sure that everyone's got their mics muted and their cameras off.
We are live, Brad.
Okay, welcome to the second session on xDesign, part of the 3D Experience platform, which is the same people that make SolidWorks. As we discussed last time, xDesign is a CAD package that runs in a browser, so it's a lot lighter. You don't need the big workhorses of computers like you do for SolidWorks and a lot of the bigger CAD packages. But it's still quite powerful. It's still pretty much as powerful as the big ones. So this workshop will build on the fundamentals we covered in the first workshop. And we kept it pretty slow last time. As the workshops progress, the pace will start to pick up. We got a lot to cover. We'll try to break it down to bite-sized pieces for each workshop. Don't worry if you start to fall behind. The nice thing about CAD, you can always go back and change it, your sketches or anything as you go in there. So just get in there, start playing, and have some fun with CAD. So we're going to start with a little bit of a slide presentation, outline the basics. It'll start to make a little more sense in the second half when we'll go in and we'll draw some of the stuff that we've talked about. Then you have some time to try it yourself, and we'll be around for questions afterwards if you'd like. So maybe just start with a little bit of terminology that might be useful. Some of it can be kind of overwhelming. There's so many different tabs. So start with sketch. As we discussed last time, the sketch is the 2D building block that we use to make 3D parts. So we take a sketch, we apply features to it, and it becomes a part. And the part is like the object or the portion of the object that we're trying to make. It's a 3D part that's tangible. We can take that, we can 3D print it or have it built. An assembly is when we take a bunch of parts and we start putting together and we actually mate them together so we can see how they relate to each other. We can see how the bolt holes line up. If we have hinges, we can see how that works. And the one confusing one is drawing. A lot of people can get drawings initially confused with sketches. A sketch is kind of the instructions how to build a part, where a drawing is detailed instructions on how to manufacture it. So it'll have a lot more information like tolerances and surface finishes. If you're going to take it out to a machine shop, you would have to provide a drawing to them as well. Whereas a lot of times we'll stop with a part and turn that into a model for 3D printing. So we'll maybe touch on drawings later on in the presentations, but we don't have to worry about those for quite yet. So sketches are pretty important because it is the base of our part. We want to make sure that it's really unambiguous and it communicates our design intent. So it's really important that someone else can go into your sketch and kind of understand what's going on. And that's what we'll talk about design intent a lot. Design intent is being able to tell by looking at someone else's sketches what they're intending to do. And then we'll talk about dimensioning a bit, which is the position and size of every sketch element has to be defined. And we'll always fully define our sketches. And fully defined means that every single element is described. And the CAD packages, all CAD packages, will make it clear when your sketch is fully defined. So for one example right now, let's start with a really simple block here. It's a large rectangle with two small rectangles inside that are holes. And as we said, we're going to fully define this. We want the length and position of every part to be described. So you'll recognize this interface from the last workshop. This is the sketch interface. So you can see last time we didn't dimension any of our parts. We kind of just put them down and let them float on the screen, which is really hard for me to do because that's my pet peeve when CADing. If there's a sketch that's not fully defined, it drives me nuts. So it was hard for me to do. So this time we'll go through and start to build on those skills and make them a little more proper. So you can see we've got an outer rectangle that's 200 tall by 100 wide. We've got a smaller rectangle in the middle, 50 by 50, so it actually becomes a square. And it's 25 from the edge and 25 from the edge. So a lot of dimensions on here. And so I'll ask now, is this sketch fully defined? Is there anything you're not sure about? Anything that's not fully explained in the sketch? Well, if we look, the blue line is a hint. So sketches can be pretty overwhelming, can be pretty hard to tell if it is fully defined. So you see that one blue line, something about that isn't defined. And if we look a little more closely, it's kind of clear that we didn't define the height of that. So if we put the 15 millimeters in for the height everything turns black, all the lines are black, so we have a fully defined sketch. The last kind of point I want to make out, if you see these two red arrows in the corner here, that's the origin, and you see the blue plane here. The origin is where all three planes intersect. And it's kind of important to lock your part down to the origin as well. It doesn't really matter where, it's pretty arbitrary, but that kind of just locks the whole relative part down in space, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. So that sketch was pretty confusing. There's a lot of dimensions. So we can use another technique called relating relationships or constraints to get this to equally lock it down. So you can see that all elements are black here, but it's a fraction of the measurements. So how do we do that? The first thing we did, we told the sketch that all the sides of the inner rectangles are equal. So in that way, by defining that one as 50 millimeters, we've now defined all of them with only one dimension. But you'll notice there's some little dots on a couple of the rectangles as well. We've also told it that the midpoints of all those rectangles are horizontal to each other. So with just those kind of one measurement for height now, and they'll always be centered, the nice thing that allows us to do now is, say if we want to change the dimension of that inner rectangle, now instead of having to go through and change each of the 50 millimeters ones, we can say that one is 65, and the entire sketch will automatically update. And as far as design intent goes, I see one dimension and I see it's fully defined. So in my mind, I'd say whoever sketched this, they're going to make all those sides equal. I see some center marks on there, center lines, the little stars here. Get my cursor back here, little stars. I'll say, okay, they define center lines, so they're probably all horizontal to each other. I kind of know what's going on in the sketch with just looking at it. So how do we relate constraint now? So the way we do that, there's another menu that kind of comes up. If we click on one of the sketch lines, it turns this glowy blue color, and that kind of selects one line. If we hold down Control, I think I said Shift here. I should change that to Control. I'll do that before we post the presentation. If we hold down Control, two lines come up. What happens now, it'll show us all the existing relations, and it'll also show us all the new relations that we can add to those as well too. So the existing relations appear around the perimeter of the sketch, and the new relations will appear up in the in a new dialog. And you kind of get used to it pretty quick. The first relation we'll talk about is a horizontal, and it's a horizontal line. The second is orthogonal. It's two lines that are orthogonal to each other. We've got an equals. That will mean that two sides are equal to each other. There's a center point or midpoint. And those are the ones that are present on the sketch. And in the dialog up top, we'll see the new ones that we can add too. Horizontal, that kind of makes sense. Collinear, if you have two lines that kind of extend in the same direction as each other. So if it's horizontal, they'd all be horizontal with respect to each other. Vertical, all be vertical. But on an angle, you can't really use horizontal or vertical constraints. So if you want them to be, all the lines to be lined up, you'd have to use the collinear. Equals, we talked about that. Parallel is another really useful one. Parallel and equal look close to each other, but the parallel lines are always a little bit rotated and longer than the equal lines in pretty much every CAD package. We have the orthogonal. Try and avoid the fix. That just kind of locks everything down in place. There's some cases where you need it, but it's a little hard to figure out what's going on in a sketch. And angular just relates a whole bunch of angles, so you can make all the angles equal to each other. That way, just like the rectangles, if we changed one of the rectangles to 60, all the rectangles changed. Where this, we changed one angle to 30, all the rectangles, or all the angles will change to 30. And one other feature we'll touch on really briefly before we dive into an example are construction lines. Construction lines are these dotted lines. They're not really part of the sketch, so we can't close sketches off with them. They're just kind of a guideline, and it's kind of nice for snapping elements too, for showing that all these circles are going to be lined up to each other. And they're quite useful, so don't be afraid to use construction lines. So we talked a bit about design intent, and that's kind of what we want to put behind sketches. We want to make sure we've got design intent. So everyone's going to do it a little bit differently. What I like to think about before I start a sketch is, what elements do I need in this sketch? Because often about multiple sketches. What sketch elements may need to change? So if it needs to change, I'll probably put a dimension on that one so I can easily change it. And what element should I dimension from? Well, if I'm changing one element, I might want to dimension from the edges of that element, so it'll automatically compensate if I ever change that. And then finally, what sketch elements can be related to each other rather than dimensioned. So you'll start to come up with your own kind of way of doing that as you proceed. So don't worry if it doesn't make sense right away. You'll build on it and go back to old examples and kind of change the way you do it, and you just get better over time. So one example I can think of is if we look at a tape roll, the center of the roll would be the origin of the sketch. That's how I would do it. The inside cardboard will always be the same diameter for pretty much any tape roll because they're usually made on the same machine. The thickness of the cardboard may change, so that might be something I'd make configurable. And the overall diameter of the roll will be the most variable, but it'll be relative to the outside. So in your head, you can start to see how you'd start to build those relations up in your sketch. So let's try something. Let's try catting a wrench. So I've got this little 6mm wrench here. Let's try and make this. So as I'm starting with a design intent, I see a circle here that looks pretty important. So we can maybe start with that. And I see a handle here that's got the width, some width that looks important too. So that's what's kind of going through my head before I even start. And for now, we'll make it just the one-sided right here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna stop the presentation. I'll go into xDesign and just run you through again. For those of you that weren't here last week, it starts up with the splash screen. I close that down. I ensure that I've got the right dashboard, the 3D Challenge Sponsorship dashboard. I hit my compass, which was something we talked about before. And you had to have a collaborative space set up. So hopefully you've done that before. Once your collaborative space is set up, you don't really need to go back in anymore. And here's the xDesign and favorite apps. If not, you can always hit the search bar and search for xDesign up there. So we'll give xDesign a second to start up. It is cloud-based, so this is not stored on your computer. So the first thing I like to do when it does come up is I close this dialog over here. And what we'll do is we're going to hit New Component. This is a new feature that looks like it's been added recently, where it gives you a list of all your workshops you can select from. So I'm going to do this in the Elegoo workshop, and I'll call this a workshop wrench. So it's making a new part in that collaborative workspace. And from last time, you'd be familiar with this. Our three orthogonal planes start with each other. For this, we can pick pretty much anyone, doesn't really matter. And as I said last time, I think the circle makes sense. So we're going to start with a circle. Let's pick the top plane here. And you can see it's kind of facing off on a angle. A lot of times when you sketch, you like to look at it straight up and down. So if I hit the N, that will show me the normal to that plane. Now I'm looking straight down on that sketch plane. We see the two red lines. That is the origin where all three orthogonal planes meet. And if you notice, I've got the circle selected here, and there's two dots in the circle. This is called a center circle, and the two dots are what we're going to have to define. So the first thing we define is the center. And if you notice, when I hover over the origin, it turns to a square. So I can click and drag and make a circle. So as you saw in the first example, I had the wrench kind of in front of a ruler. And it doesn't really matter if you're exact for the dimensions right now, especially for an example like this. We can always go back and change it, refine it. So I made a circle, but it doesn't really know how big it is right now. So this little two lines with arrows between, this is our dimensioning tool. And if I just hold the mouse steady, it'll say sketch dimension. So if I click anywhere on the perimeter of that circle, it can't be inside. It's got to be the perimeter. If the whole perimeter glows, I click once, and right now it says it's 179 millimeters diameter. So the second we hit click to show what dimensions are going to be, it brings up the ability to change that. So I'm going to change it from 179 to 16. And it didn't change size this time because nothing else was defined on the screen. So it could be any size that it wanted. So don't worry about that. As we start to have, now that we've got one piece locked down, when we start to change dimensions, you will see it move. Okay, so we talked about center lines too. So I kind of like to often do a center line as well when I'm doing a sketch. Makes it a little easy to visualize and dimension. So I click the line tool down here, and there's no special line in xDesign for a center line. So I'm going to go out and I'm just going to make a line, and you can see the lines continuing. So if I hit escape, it'll stop the line. And now, because when I hit escape, it unhighlights what was selected in your toolbar. Now I can start to select new things. So if I go over the line, hover over it, and then I right click, it brings up our little dialog. And one of the things we see a solid line versus a dotted line. If I stop moving, it'll say construction. So I click that, you can see the line goes solid. So that's a construction line right now. And it's kind of nice to have that as just a base for our sketch. So we'll dimension it and say the overall dimension of this, let's say it's 75 millimeters. And I can kind of use that as the length of the wrench. So let's put another circle on the end. And if you notice, I clicked the center of the center line, and it snapped the circle to that. So those two are now joined to that center line. So say if I go hit escape to get back out, if I see the 75, if I click that, I can maybe change it to 78 if I want a little bit bigger. And that circle will now automatically adjust. So another thing we had on our first wrench, we had a handle. So I'm going to click the line again. You can see there's 2 points on here. And we can automatically start to build in relationships or constraints. So see how there's a circle on here? So basically, if I start the line and it's something's highlighted blue, it's going to do a constraint. We're going to constrain it to that line. It'll be coincident with that line. So the start of that line will be coincident. Now, as moving around, you'll see an H kind of appear too. That's an automatic constraint for horizontal. So I can move all the way over, move it down here until I see H. So now if you look, I see a horizontal constraint, and I see the other side is glowing blue. So when I do that, that line will be now locked between those two circles. So I'm going to escape. If I grab this line now, no matter where I move it, it's going to be locked. Now you can see the circles changing size. Don't worry about that right now. We've not defined the size. So we'll get to that in a sec. And that's why it's important to define everything in your sketch, because you can have a lot of unintended consequences. Now there's two ways to draw a line. You can click and release, or you can click and hold. So if I click and hold, when I stop drawing a line, it stops the sketch. So I don't have to, it stops the line, so I have to press escape. Now we'll talk about how to relate another way. In the first one, we made sure that our cursor was hovered over this circle. In this case, we didn't. So now, if I go and click on the end point of that line, I'm going to hold down Control and click on the circle. When I let go, this new dialog popped up. So now we can see we can make it coincident, we can make it concentric, we can fix it or dimension it. So if we say coincident, that means that endpoint will be somewhere on the perimeter of that circle. There it is. But another thing that we had on this one was horizontal, but this one is not horizontal yet. So if we, again, if we right click, here's the constraints available. We can make it horizontal, vertical. So let's make it horizontal. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. This is starting to look a little more like a wrench. Not quite yet. But we've just got two lines floating in space now. But we kind of want them to be centered. And that's kind of where the center line comes into play. And another constraint. So if I click this line, I click that line and this line. So I've got the two lines of the construction line. Again, when I'm done clicking, the dialog comes up with our new relations or constraints. This one looks really interesting because it looks like exactly what we drew. I see two solid lines, which are like standard sketch lines, and a dotted line. And what that'll do, it'll make the two lines symmetric around the construction line. So I click that, suddenly it's pretty useful because now if I change, the lines are both going to move together. Now this is really starting to look like a wrench. And going back to like your grade school geometry, all the different relationships you knew about, let's make a new relationship on here to make this end just look like it's a nice little curve on it. So I'm going to click the circle. I'm going to control and see what other relations we have here. And they're kind of always context sensitive. It'll tell you the relationships that are available in tangent. So if we were to make that line tangent with a circle, that's often a really nice way to terminate your circles and lines. If it's tangent, so this line comes down, it's completely tangent with that circle. So now when we take and drag this, now it's really starting to look like a handle. That's kind of how we talk about how we kind of build on CAD. So let's make that handle a fixed width, and based on the wrench I saw, the tiny little wrench, we'll start dimensioning that. So I clicked on the dimension tool. You can see it automatically defaulted to dimensioning this line, which we don't really care about, but it's still floating, so it's not fully done yet. As we move down, that one turns blue. So now instead of dimensioning the along the length of it, it's going to allow us to dimension the distance between the two lines. So 5 looks a little bit thin to hold on to. Let's make it 7 millimeters. Okay, so now we have a wrench with a handle and everything is fully defined. But we need a place to put the bolt or the nut, whatever we're trying to wrench on. So we're going to click the line tool again, and we'll make like a line on the nut I had, or the wrench I had. It went a little bit past the center, so we'll click there, and I'll make another line from here. You can see I'm trying to make them horizontal. I'm waiting for that H to appear. But they're different lengths right now. There's a few ways we can handle that. Let's say we click that endpoint and this endpoint. The dialog comes up again. And it's kind of nice because it always helps you if you can't quite remember what you're supposed to do. Let's make them vertical. So now you see the vertical constraint appears here. So if I escape out and I move one of these lines, they both move. But again, if I move this, we don't really want to wrench not symmetric like that. So I guess you can probably guess what the next constraint we want to do is. Click that, click our construction line, click the top of it, the dialog pops up, and we have the symmetric constraint. Okay. And on the wrench, sticking a ruler in it, it looked like it was maybe about 9 millimeters deep. So I can click the sketch dimension toolbar again. I click that, and we can set it to 9. Now, some of the wrenches have a kind of a hexagonal pattern here. Let's make an arc. So here, some of the elements, if you click on the dialog, there's different ways of making arcs. But let's try a 3-point arc for that one. So that one, you see the dots. That's where you're going to define where a center arc, you define the center, 2 other points along something else. But for this example, we've got our 2 points here. So we'll make a part there, and then there's this side of a wrench. Okay. So you can see there's a lot of blue in here still, so it's not fully defined yet. Often, if it's not fully defined and I'm not sure why, what you can do, you escape out, grab one of the endpoints, and start moving around, and you'll see, oh, we didn't say how wide this has to be. If it's not fully defined, you're allowed to drag it. If it is fully defined, when I drag it, nothing happens because everything's fully defined and related with this one. So we're going to do, I think I said a 9 millimeter wrench. Click between there and there, and say we want it to be 9. Okay, so we're getting close. This line isn't defined yet, so let's click on this guy. Okay, there. Oh, so we kind of just defined it. So yeah, if you ever do something you don't mean to, click on the line. You can hit the delete key. what I would almost want to do here is drag it and see where it looks good. Now when I drag it, you can see right in the middle, there's something moving here. That's the origin for the arc. So if I move it around, you know what, looks not bad if we put it on the center. So we made the origin of this arc the same as this one. It's looking a lot more wrench-like, but we've got a blue colored circle here, a blue colored circle here. So the problem is they're two independent solids right now. What we want to do is maybe cut some of the lines away to make them kind of flow into each other, to let the package know that this is one piece. So down here we get this little scissor tool, which is trim or extend. So we click that. You can see now we've got a little scissors. What we can do is start to draw a line. If we trim that, we can come down and trim this. We've trimmed those lines out. Now what's happened when we start to trim this side? Trim that, we trim that, and our whole wrench just colored in. Well, now of course we probably want to trim the opening for it as well. That's starting to look like a wrench. This 9 looks a little bit big though right now, so let's click it once. We can go down to maybe 7 millimeters deep, maybe 6. Maybe make this a bit bigger, 18. Okay. So I think what I want to do here is make this, I'm not really happy with this, the location of the circle right here. Okay, so, this is a new package to me as well, and the interface is slightly different. Okay, so if you're ever in a place where you're not sure what to do, often if it's just one element, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the circle and draw it again. There. Delete it and go back to 3-point arc. Let's make it around there. That looks more wrench-like to me. Actually, what we can do, I talk about sometimes really nice, we won't even bother tangent. So here we can grab the dimension tool. Can we round it off to like 4 millimeters or something? Nope. We'll leave it as what it was. So we'll leave it at that for now. So just the 4.56. So when you dimension something, so if you slide it around by hand, often you put a dimension on it and we'll just lock it down and fully define your sketch. So now if I look and I try and drag this, I can't because it's fully defined. So it's good. It's starting to look like a wrench. If we go to the features now, we can do one of the features that we talked about, such as an extrude. And you can see by default, it knows we want to do an add because there's nothing to it. We can say, let's make this, I don't know, maybe 6 millimeters. That's looking pretty wrench-like. And then the checkbox here. There, we've got a wrench. But you know what, to be honest, this handle looks a little bit long to me. And talking about sketching, we can always go back in and change stuff. So over in the design manager here, if we were to click on the sketch, a new dialog comes up, and here is an edit sketch. I think some packages allow you to double click. With SolidWorks, usually you have to click up and hit edit sketch. And it's going to go right back into the sketch we just did. You can see all the dimensions we laid out there were there. So let's change this back down to 60, see if that looks any more. That looks a little more visually pleasant to me. Then up here we can cancel the sketch if we don't like what we did, or we can accept it. So we accept it. There's our model there. So that's kind of a really brief introduction to kind of get you started. So maybe we'll give some time right now to dive in and try it yourself. And I've got a couple challenges for you. So try and draw that wrench if you can. And some bonus work. You might want to hang this up on your workbench, so maybe you want to put a little hole right here in the handle. So see if you can figure that out. And then for the level 2 challenge, if you're feeling really interested in this, let's put in there one of these ends on the opposite end and make it a 7mm wrench. And then level 3, if you notice the wrench, there's it's called an offset wrench. So the mouth of the wrench isn't usually parallel like we drew. Usually it's offset. And the reason for that, if you're wrenching in a tight space, if you put the wrench on the bolt and turn it, and then take the wrench out, flip the wrench over 180 degrees and put it back on, this offset here will be facing the opposite way, and it just kind of allows you to get into tighter spaces, and it's easier to wrench in tighter spaces. So at that, maybe we'll take a little break right now. We can have some questions. And in the slide presentation, that'll be available later. If you're really stuck, I've got some just helper slides right here. But yeah, maybe we'll take a break now. If people want to try it out, you can give it a try, and we can ask questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. I just wanted to let everybody know I threw a link in the chat. This is a Google form that we wanted you to fill in to give us a little bit of feedback on how this presentation went. I'm also just going to release a poll right now, if you don't mind. Just finding out if you enjoyed the workshop. So I'm just going to launch it right now. If you wouldn't mind letting us know. This is just a quick feedback for us. Thank you for the people who have voted so far. Love it. Look at all the yeses. Oh, fabulous. Great. Okay, it looks like we've got everybody. So I'm going to end the poll now. If you have any questions, Brad, do we want to pause? Like, are we done with the live stream, or do we want to keep it going? What's your preference?
If there's any questions that would benefit from showing it on screen, if there's any areas people need clarification on, maybe other people have that same issue. So if you don't feel comfortable turning your mic on, just go ahead and type it in the chat, and I can go into it that way. Maybe we'll give it a minute or so that way to see if any questions come up that would benefit from putting the xDesign back up and answering it that way. If not, we can stop the live stream and give people time to work through, and maybe some questions will come up if you're working through it.
I had a quick question. Things were going okay, and then at some point I got lost on making the mouth of the wrench, those lines related to each other. So the handle had the guideline in the middle that you could make relative to each other, and then I just can't figure out how to do that for the opening of the wrench. Okay, that's a good question. So what I'll do is, because right now we're in our part space right now, I'm going to go back to the design manager, click once, and up here I can edit the sketch. So if I'm unsure, can I move this guy now? I'm trying to move this so I can see. Maybe I have to just pan around a little bit. Yeah, so if you see the relations here now, we've got this relation here, which is the symmetric relationship. So because we did the symmetric, we said this line, we selected all three of these lines, hit the symmetric relationship. The center line, the construction line was in the middle, so it made a lot of sense. This one, the construction line, you can kind of think of construction lines going infinitely, so you can still use this construction line to make these three symmetrical. So if I hit click, 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 and let go. Oh, so yeah, that's how I change relationships. Okay, so I figured out how to do it. So if I was to turn that off, this is the symmetric construction. So I just turn that off of mine. Now if I pull this guy, you can see it's really going to be a little bit off. We can completely destroy our sketch that way. So if your wrench is ending up looking like that, the way you get that back in is that one. you click, so be careful where you click. Click the construction line, click the other line, I let go of the control, the dialog pops up, and now I can see we've got the symmetric constraint again. I click that, it'll pop back in. And the thing I was struggling with before, this constraint was turned on, so I just had to click that and let go. That's the one I couldn't figure out before, but we've got to figure it out. Did that answer your question? Did you get it the wrench back on track again?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the live stream, and people are welcome to stay on, and then we can continue asking questions. So thank you everybody for